This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Pooka. Say hi, Pooka.
Good evening.
What are we talking about tonight, Pooka?
Tonight is a deep dive into the second volume of the Immortal Eyes Chronicle, Shadows on the Hill.
A timeless book, I would like to say, because my copy, at least, has no copyright date.
Same.
Yes.
It is copyrighted. We can verify that. But
yes.
Yeah.
By White Wolf, but yes. And it's the authors listed are Bill Bridges, Jennifer Lindberg, and Angel C. McCoy.
In terms of the date, I assume I believe it's early 1996, and we do have an ad in the very back for Vampire the Dark Ages coming in spring 1996. So
Yes.
Around that time.
Yeah, that would make sense. So I want to give a disclaimer for this. This book is mostly set in Hawaii and deals heavily with the indigenous fae of Hawaii, the Menehune. I assume I pronounced that right. And I just want to give a disclaimer that I know even less about that culture than I do about indigenous North American culture. So I don't know about you, Pooka, but so I will do my best. But there's a lot of... I had no idea what this is coming from reading this book, so...
Yeah, I mean, my familiarity is also in passing.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, any comments, like, I'm doing my best based on what I know about things. But
Likewise.
And it's mostly like general about how cultures are written about more than this culture in particular for me.
I know more about the history of Polynesian migration than specifics about Hawaiian culture.
Same, yeah.
So...
Yeah, and like I've known some non-indigenous people in Hawaii, but even then not a lot, and I've never been there myself, so
yeah,
even those bits of culture
same on all counts.
Yeah. So I guess we should get started with the first chapter.
Yeah.
So it's very similar to the previous Immortal Eyes book. Just giving a little overview about what this book is about and what a chronicle book is, with I think some copy and paste there. It does say that this can explicitly be used as a setting book, and I would have to agree with it. We can talk about what we think about the setting later, but I found this... There's one chapter where it's story, and even that's full of settings. So even if you decide you don't want to run the specific story in the scenes chapter, and you did like the setting info, I don't think you'd be wasting your money on that part in that sense. But
which you could say about the toy box as well. It's perfectly adequate as just a setting book for San Francisco.
Yeah, but this one is like even more, it seemed a little bit.
Perhaps.
Yeah. And so, yeah, unless you had something else to say on the introduction, I guess we can move on to setting.
Not really, just that it's overall structured in the same way as the toy box is, where we have book one and book two. Book one consists of general information, history, and geography. Book two gives you a wide variety of characters in addition to story scenes that you can use.
Do you want to start with this, what you think about the setting chapter?
Yeah. So with the setting chapter, the things that I would say I appreciate the most are their attention to tourism, since they point out repeatedly Hawaii at this point is the economy is very driven by tourism. And similar to how we had discussed before, the balance of glamour and banality in that process, in how tourism affects different groups of fae in a place and different types of tourists, how they have different approaches to this landscape. That is addressed here, particularly in terms of how it can provide glamour for the Kithane, but then banality for the Menehune, because it's pushing their traditions to the side, in favor of packaging and commercializing the natural landscape and stuff. They also say things like Hawaii is a place of contrasts, of violent quaking earth and quiet lush solitude, of intensely congested streets and uninhabited rainforests, and kind of talking about those tensions. I wish they had done more of that, but I'm glad they at least highlighted it, because I think a lot of people have the image of the islands as just this lush paradise without any of the kind of social problems or economic issues that are present there and are
Yeah.
often founded on race and ethnicity. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually, listening to another podcast a few weeks ago by someone who was visiting his in-laws in Hawaii. Like, he visits them sometimes because his wife's originally from there, and like he is not in a touristy area, and he's like, it's completely different.
Yeah.
He doesn't like it, but like it's not the same. There's the tourist places, and then the rest of the state, I guess.
Yeah.
And those are very different places, which sort of hinted at here too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just like, I guess if I ever did a Changeling Las Vegas book, which would be interesting. But
Yeah,
or
it's one of those places where the touristic aspects are so heavily foregrounded that the actual lived reality of a lot of the people who are there, which deserves attention, is glossed over in a big way.
yeah, his main complaint was just how many spiders and how big they are. But
Oh no, the worst.
yeah, spiders and centipedes or millipedes, no centipedes. Yeah, but anyway, but yeah. So this setting chapter, like actually the 3 setting chapters, including the setting chapter, a bit less I found than the first one. I think are not just things you could get. I mean, there's still a lot of you could get it from Wikipedia these days.
Yeah.
There was more specific, useful stuff for game that you wouldn't be able to get from Wikipedia. I found like more talking specifically about changelings and things like that.
Well, we do get the note that they are considered part of the Kingdom of Pacifica, which I believe has been dropped out of C20.
Mm-hmm.
And even here, it's kind of like, well, why would they care about?
Well, it's also they actually express, at least in the first Ed Core book, but it seems like maybe the kingdoms aren't completely static either across.
That's true. Yeah.
They also, one interesting thing that gets introduced here, and they touch it a little bit, and I'm really not sure what to think about it, mostly because I don't have enough information. It talks about before the Polynesian people arrived in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know what that's referencing to.
I'm going to have thoughts about that when we get to the history chapter.
Okay.
We get summaries briefly of the climate and the islands themselves. So just briefly from northwest to southeast, even though we go in the reverse direction in the geography chapter, I'm going to try to pronounce these correctly. We have Niihau, Kauai, Oahu, Molokai, Lanai, Maui, and Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these, for anyone who's unfamiliar with the geology of the Hawaiian Islands, they are volcanic in origin, and there's a hot spot under the oceanic plate, and the Pacific plate has been moving northwest over the hot spot. So the islands in the southeast are newer than the ones in the northwest. So the big island, Hawaii, is the freshest, where the active volcanoes still are, and the rest are dormant volcanoes that have eroded into smaller and smaller shapes.
Yeah, and in case we fall into the terrible banality of being a geologist, according to this book,
there was that.
Does also have a sea serpent on it. So.
Yes, excellent. We get summaries about the demographics and economics. Again, Wikipedia could probably give you a great deal of information.
Certainly more up-to-date information.
Yeah. It's overall a pretty straightforward and simple chapter that just kind of gives you some basic info. They say it's an exciting place for Changeling because the constant flow of people allows them continuous access to glamour from all walks of life and all attitudes. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it does talk about that being handy for ravaging.
Yeah. And there is banality too. I mean, between tourism and overdevelopment and, there's scientists.
And actual plantations.
Yeah, run by Big Pineapple.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, the notion of scientists coming to study the volcanoes, looking at them as geological constructs rather than magical sites, I understand that mentality to an extent because there are, even ongoing, there are currently struggles about things like building observatories on, I think it's on Mauna Loa, which is a sacred mountain. And so there's been a lot of resistance to that. On the other hand, it doesn't give any depth to people who might be scientifically interested in these things and still feel awe and wonder.
Well, it also gives a lot of geological information from those banal.
Yeah.
And also, like, it's not like they say all the Kithane, like the Western Kithane on the islands are banal either, even though they're not all being super reverent either. So it's anyway.
Yeah. It certainly comes across to me as a book that was written by committee. And we do have three
Mm-hmm.
authors, and it's unclear how much they might have consulted with each other, but they definitely,
Yeah.
different sections seems to have different sort of threads they're drawing
Or
on.
sometimes even the same section. There's
Hmm.
some stuff we'll get into later on that too.
But that's basically it for chapter 1, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. So chapter 2 is Hawaiian history.
Yes. And a lot of this chapter was actually copied wholesale into C20. So
Mm-hmm.
the information in that book on the Menehune, I believe, is in several sections drawn word for entire paragraphs.
And yeah, it gets a lot into things like the concept of, well, it looks or it gets into the history. That's what I was talking about, those first dreamers thing where it says is, I mean, it does present it as a legend that the Menehune have.
Well, here's the thing. Well, before getting into that, I do want to say that the opening to this chapter, I think, is actually really beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It says things like, the earth was born of fire and pressure. Hot fluid rock burst from the earth from millions of volcanoes, spreading forth and cooling into a rugged and rounded mantle. And it's just this like big idea geology opening that's really kind of cool. It reminds me of if you ever played the original Civilization computer game from the early 90s, and there was that opening animation that was like, in the beginning the earth was out without form, kind of like adapting Genesis, and it
Mm-hmm.
reminded me of that. So it's like, whoa, so I
Yeah.
liked that bit. But yeah, so with the first dreamers thing, I did a little bit of reading about this, and I'm not an expert in the mythology, so I can't speak to this with any authority. But it seems to me like the idea of pre-Polynesian Hawaiians was a myth that existed in the early days and kind of got, I think in this book, because the Menehune are individuals that the characters might meet or that players might want to play, they can't be cast as the pre-Polynesian Hawaiians that they originally are in the myths. And then
Oh.
the source that's quoted here, Martha Beckwith, I have no idea if they had other sources for the mythology that they were looking at or if it was just her. But when I was kind of looking at this background information, it seems as though she kind of talks about this legend that there was another group of people even before the Menehune, the Mu'aimaya, and it's not really clear where she got that from or how well supported that is in
Mm.
other sources.
Okay.
So it's unclear to me. What I find really frustrating is how they linked that to the concept of the continent of Mu, which is the Pacific version of Atlantis and is equally
Mm.
fraught with problematic stuff. So yeah, they really leaned hard into that, and I'm not happy about it.
Yep.
And other things like they talk about Pele, who's one of the most important figures in the pantheon, and kind of introduce her with a Hunter S. Thompson quote. And I'm like, I don't know that that was the best choice.
Yeah.
Um, they talk about Kamapua'a, the pig god of the islands, and discuss a myth about him. And it's like they go out of their way to avoid talking about any kind of genitalia or
Mm-hmm.
any kind of sexual act, which is strange because,
Well, it's really strange given some later chapters, like the Unseelie
yeah.
chapter.
And I suppose there's this idea like, oh well, this is Changeling, so we can't let it get quite as lurid as other World of
Mm-hmm.
Darkness books. And I want to say, of course you can. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, again, there's also the Unseelie chapter, I'll just say.
yeah,
So maybe that's inconsistency, like you were talking about with
yeah,
different authors.
perhaps. Anyway, it's a sidebar that I'm not wild about.
Yeah.
But then we get into the history since the arrival of the Polynesians.
Mm-hmm. And it mentions the kapu, which I'm a little bit confused if it's related to taboo or anyway.
It is. No,
Yes.
it's a cognate word.
Oh, it is a
So
cognate word. Oh, okay, that makes sense though.
the actual systems differ from culture to culture, but the root concept, the word
Yeah.
is cognate.
Or it can even differ within culture, but that's a actually that does get brought up later too. But okay, so that was just them using that was when replacing the word actually isn't completely necessarily inappropriate. Okay.
I will say, as a white teen in the suburbs reading this book for the first time in ninth grade or whatever it was, this did give me a lot of information about the culture that I had never heard before. And at the time, I may have taken more of it for granted than I should have because I was an impressionable youth. But I still appreciate that they did give you as much as they did.
Mm-hmm.
So it is something that I wanted to learn more about and go back later and clarify how much of it was true. The descriptions of mana and the descriptions of luau's and all of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have a little bit of information about the arrival of the Polynesians who sailed their boats across the Pacific thousands and thousands of miles, and it's still kind of flabbergasting to think about people doing that. So
Yep. And then a different kind of flabbergasting sailors of Captain Cook.
yes, we have notes about that.
Yeah, him and his crew being, or crews or whatever, as being a force of banality across the world.
Yep.
I think I think that tracks. I don't
Yeah.
know about Hawaii enough about Hawaii specifically, but I know enough about other islands he went to that.
Yeah, and so it describes Captain Cook's arrival, and it's the kind of narrative that we've seen elsewhere in the world where white man explorer arrives, takes advantage of local legend to set himself up as a god,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't feel guilty in saying he got what he deserved, which was
Yes.
he tried to sail away and his ship had a problem, so he had to sail back, and
Mm-hmm.
the folks on the island said, well, but if you're a god, why do you need our help to repair your boat? Just. So when it
Yeah.
became clear that he was not a god, some trouble ensued. He ended up getting killed on the beach. And frankly, given the number of venereal diseases he introduced and the sort of
Just taking advantage of
and
people, really. Like
taking
that's
advantage of people, I
yeah,
don't really feel any sympathy. So
yeah. Like, I don't,
yeah,
I don't. Just like with the Nunehi personally, and again, I wouldn't want us to trump anyone from the culture. I want to hear what they're saying. And if, by the way, if you're listening to this and you're live in Hawaii, especially if you're of the indigenous people of Hawaii, please get in touch with us if you'd like to discuss this further. But yeah, the way that they get affected, the effect of banality and it causing an equivalent to the shattering, I find to be not necessarily a problem. The way that manifests in terms of getting cut off from the dreaming when it doesn't do that to the cathane and all this other, that I don't like. But
and that goes back to the question of whether the shattering, slamming shut the gates to Arcadia, if that propagated out through the world, even if it was slowly, did it happen all at once, or are certain gates meant to shut down, are trods to the dreaming meant to close only when banality first arrives? And I don't know that we get a clear answer on that, whether it was a
uh,
global event from the start.
I haven't come across anything suggesting it so far. Maybe there's a future book suggesting that it was a global event.
Yeah. That seems to be the case here, though, because when they talk about banality arriving on the islands, they mention how the Selkies had kind of given them warning, saying, hey, by the way, the gates to the dreaming are closing, have closed. And the Minhune said, but we haven't noticed. We're living our lives here. There's plenty of glamour.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's happy. And that they didn't even realize that they were closed until later when banality did hit. They tried to
Oh,
go and found it.
oh! I thought when banality hit it, that's what closed it.
It's unclear. The
Okay, maybe I read
Selkies
it
said
wrong.
they had
Yeah,
closed, but whether they
yeah.
actually had is unclear.
You're right. Gates to the dreaming had. I mean, they should have known. Like, why would they? That was how many centuries?
Unclear. at
Yeah.
least at least 3 or 4.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about they needed to do this after Captain Cook arrived, and the shattering was the Black Death.
Right. So 4.5 centuries between those two, and the Selkies arrived somewhere in between.
Yeah. See, okay, they're now I'm reading it again. Yeah, or why need to return to Arcadia? So they're like from Arcadia. Yeah, there's some interesting inconsistencies just within this book too. Yeah, I had misread that as the gates will close, but no, it's saying the gates had.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's strange.
Speaking of inconsistencies, one of the ones that I found most irritating in this chapter is the continuous misspelling of Kamehameha, who's perhaps the most well known to non Indigenous Hawaiians, the most well known figure from the history. And they just keep
Yeah,
misspelling it slightly. It keeps going back and
like
forth.
differently misspelling.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it says King Kamehameha in the header, and then Kamahamaha, which is a different name. So,
Hmm.
But it goes
Mm,
back and forth, so it's just poor copy editing, I guess.
yeah. So yeah, we get through the whole Cook arise. King Kamehameha takes over, like ends up becoming the sort of king of the whole island chain.
Unites them through,
Yep.
I suppose, battle and conquest, but then peace.
Yeah, and it even suggests it introduces nuance to that and talks about the knocker Jack Doggan arrives and teaches the changeling way
Yeah.
and then gets possibly killed or sacrificed.
Well, human sacrifice at least. Not necessarily.
Well, no, they said maybe he was. Yeah.
Well, it says he was never seen again, so who knows?
Yeah, and they also it's similar like they had dealt with the spirits but didn't have that whole totem set up till after that too.
Yeah, well, that's true. So we get information that they formed a pact with the spirits of the Umbra,
Mhm.
which I don't know that we had something that specific for the Nunahi. Maybe in the
No.
player's guide.
There
Didn't
was
bother
a
about that.
something I have to go back to the episode or the book. Well, in the previous what we've already done on the Nunahi, in the werewolf crossover book,
Right.
it had something similar where they weren't really tied to spirits until after their shattering too.
Yeah, but it's presented as like a singular pact that was made
Mm.
at a specific point in time.
Yep.
I did find it interesting. So with the arrival of banality, it does say from the first iron nail traded to a Hawaiian on Kauai, the Menehune felt the wave of a coming storm. So that notion of a physical iron nail being the
Hmm.
first pierce of banality is a sort of poetic.
Yeah. In Changeling, I think that does work as a thing
Yeah.
potentially, but
And other things too, though, like there's a reference to how the kapu system was proven false through the actions of two of the widows of Kamehameha, and that when they violated the kapu and showed that they were false, that kind of shattered the social compact of the people. Society was in disarray, life was bereft of meaning,
hmm.
and into that void, that's what enabled the Christian missionaries to kind of step in and do their banal thing. And it just seemed very pat, like just
I
very,
fully believe that whoever wrote that section did read it in a book.
yeah, I would believe that. Just, it's like in 3 sentences, we go from here's this incredibly complex social structure tied up with religion that's been handed down
Hmm.
and kept intact for centuries. And this one violation, everything comes crashing down. It just seems a bit too facile to me. But
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I can't remember. I think I read something about this before, but
yeah,
oh, and then it talks about the plantation, American plantation takeover.
yeah. And essentially the annexation through corporate interests of the
Yeah,
entire kingdom.
which this presents as like almost like that's a conspiracy theory, and I'm like, I thought that was just like, yeah, that's what happened. But again, maybe which book you read, but
Yeah. Anyway, that's the other part of the 1-2 punch of banality.
hmm, at least we don't have a bunch of she with freeholds who were there from beforehand.
Small miracles.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fairly straightforward overview of the pillaging of the land, the coup of the plantation owners, the annexation by the US, and the
Hmm.
whatever the word will be, of the beaches and the
Yeah.
rainforests and everything.
Mention of World War II and stuff, but
Yeah,
yeah.
very brief mention.
Yeah, they talk a little bit about it later, mostly with the wraiths they bring in, but
Yeah,
talk about how Menehune music can basically, system wise, it sounds like, Seder revelry, but lowers banality.
yeah.
And talks about the Rokia.
Well, if you're going to have Rokia anywhere in a crossover sense,
Yeah. And I remember the Rokia breed book or whatever also does talk about Hawaii a fair amount. So,
yeah. There's a bit about the manufactured paradise of the modern state. And since this is 25 years in the past, I do wonder how much has changed, but I suspect not that much. I suspect it
hmm,
is still the same mix of natural beauty, poverty in many places, and overdevelopment and over tourism in others.
yeah. And then some fights to help make things better have succeeded and some have failed, and which they get into here as well. Yeah. Like, well, throughout the books, this book. Yeah, and there's like 6 or 7 Uktena Geru on the islands.
Yeah,
Like,
just for some reason, you know.
like that's a lot. There's a lot of words put to them. Especially since they drop a Black Fury in later.
Right. Well, that's the thing. We have these prodigals mentioned, and we don't have any representatives from these three groups in particular as
Yeah.
NPCs later on. So
Yeah. Like, if you're just going to say, and there's some others, and then here's some others, that's one thing. But, like, oh,
yeah,
yeah, they don't even mention wraiths here. Or Rokia. Yeah. Or Kitsune. Or Octena. Yeah. There's no stats for any of them.
there are also references to how there were already Kithane living on the islands when the Shi returned in the resurgence, which makes sense because,
Yep.
you know, and when the Shi arrived to kind of stake their claim, that the locals, the Sealy locals at least, before the Shi arrived, they were like, oh, that's thousands of miles away. They're not here. We don't care. And then as soon as they did arrive, the Sealy at least said, oh, okay, yeah, we'll swear fealty, like out
Oh,
of
yeah. I
nowhere.
have. Well, let's wait till we get to the Celia and Unseelie chapters to get too much into this, but I have
Mhm.
thoughts about the two courts of Kithane, how it's represented in this book, and it's strange. It doesn't really fit even with any of the other Changeling books I've read before or since. So
Well,
yeah.
let's get through chapter 3, geography first,
Yes.
as that is next. Overall, though, the history chapter, informative at points, moves very quickly at others. Too quickly, I would say.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, it does mention that the Unseelie exist really without any kind of structure, and then we get a story talk. We get some chapters talking about their structure later, but
Yeah. There are reasons for that have to
yeah,
do
it's
with the
true.
immortalized story, but
Hmm.
that's a separate discussion, which we will also get to.
I do feel like this was written by somebody who at least lived several years in Hawaii.
The
Like,
geography part?
yeah, this
Perhaps.
level of detail, like, or they knew someone who, like, it was just the kind of little, like, oh, I went here and I saw things, and it's like, it seems more than you would just get on like a vacation or two.
Mhm.
But I have no idea how
Yeah.
accurate it is, but just the level of stuff, it's like, it reminds me of, what, well, it makes me think of like what I would write about in a place I live,
Mhm.
as opposed, or have lived, rather than like a place I visited once.
Especially the descriptions of Hilo, which is the largest city on the Big Island, because you
Hmm.
get, sort of things about, oh, there are lots of orchid nurseries, and oh, here's a craft shop that sells hats, and
Yep.
here's
And
the
it's like, oh,
rainforest
these
zoo.
trees you can get glamour from. And like,
Yeah.
it just feels like the writer has seen them and really liked those trees as well.
We also get some information about the freehold of Irtalian, the Unseelie Lord. So, as a bit of context, at this point in the story, in the tie-in novels, essentially what happens, spoiler, at the end of the Toy Box, the first novel, is Glynis, who's this Unseelie sorceress with ties to the Shadow Court, brings back
Oh.
Irtalian, who's trapped in this dreaming prison. He had
Oh.
been exiled from Arcadia because he had tried to start a rebellion, and she gives him a supermodel body and brings him back in San Francisco. They escape to Hilo, where he sets himself up as the new Unseelie Lord, kind of pushing out some of the Unseelie who had already been there. And so
Oh.
that's that's the context into which the characters, if you run the stories in this book, are arriving.
I haven't read those novels, so that I was trying to just piece it together from the toy box and then this, and it
Mm-hmm.
it felt weird.
Yeah, I think also, and we'll get to this when we talk about the appendix too, there is a chronology of the novel in this book that is way more detailed than we get in the toy box. Like, we get a
Hmm.
chronology in that, but it's just like, on this day, the companions go here. On this day,
Hmm.
the companions find this. In this book, it's like, so and so has a conversation where they grapple with the inner turmoil of their soul. Then they go eat some food. And it's really like a chapter by chapter, even section by section within chapter breakdown. So you get a lot more detail to work with. So if we had had that in the first book, a lot of the pre existing political structure issues probably would have been clearer.
Hmm. So I have a question. What do you think about in this chapter? It has various locations giving bonus dice to a given art.
Yeah, it
Like,
does.
that's a interesting mechanic. I never.
I'm totally fine with it. I like things
Mhm.
like that. So as long as it's justifiable and the storyteller is okay with it, why not?
I'm just thinking, if I do end up doing a write up of my own city, maybe I should.
Yeah.
That's an idea.
So then we get some information about Volcanoes National Park, where one can walk up to the crater of Kilauea.
Mm-hmm.
which is the center of Pele's home.
Yep.
Some lava hag chimera.
Yep. Which is interesting genesis where those came from. And the whole Oathbreaker, not Oathbreaker.
Yeah. He hunts down taboo breakers. Or
Yes.
kapu breakers. Kapu aqua.
Yeah, I found that kind of neat. If you can get to like the safe zone, you're okay. They also mention in here about there are Menehune with like regular mortal jobs and stuff, which
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it should be a big deal, but
Yeah, it's a little perplexing. It's the same kind of tension, honestly, that you see with write-ups of the Nunihi, where some of the time they seem to want to portray them as these isolated indigenous fae living in secluded corners of nature and only kind of popping out briefly because they're so worried about banality, or people who are embedded in the cultures they came from, have connections, have dreamers, and
mm-hmm.
yeah, maybe they do kind of live apart to maintain their communion with nature,
Yeah,
but are otherwise changelings in
yeah.
any other sense of the word.
Again, it's not my cultures, but like personally, I think the second one makes more sense to me because they're changelings. They have to deal with banality, sure, but like,
Yeah. And it makes more sense for this game. For a role playing game, it makes more
mm-hmm.
sense. And
Yep,
that the relationship of the role playing game to the specific beliefs of each culture, that's something that can be hashed out
yeah,
case by case. But, it does make it easier to integrate those mythological figures as Fae in Changeling by having them be more or less similar to everyone else, having
yeah.
that human side and that Fae side and balancing the two in whatever way is most appropriate for them.
And personally, if I'm running a game and there's somebody from one of those cultures, and especially, people travel the world and we're online gaming now and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, like, I'd want them to go, "Oh, that's cool. Hey, I like that. Sure, yeah, I'd like to play one of these." Right? Not here. Let's do some major reworld building, or you have to play Cathane, or because it's or whatever. Yeah,
Right. Well, and you don't want someone to come and say, I'd like to play one of these. And the response of the storyteller being, okay, you can never interact with mortal society
yeah,
except for your very limited,
yeah,
your personal connections from your own
yeah,
family or something. So
yeah.
you want to give players the option to explore like everybody else. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I suppose it's the kind of thing that players and storytellers have to balance and discuss individually.
Mm-hmm.
This got a little bit far away from geography.
Yeah.
So sidebar closed for now, but it is an important
Mm-hmm.
discussion to have. So
Yep.
after the Big Island, we have Maui, and yeah, just kind of bits one after the other about different locations. I liked the notion of Haleakala National Park, which is the world's largest dormant volcano with a rainforest growing up around it, home to many native species, with most growing extinct as the years pass. But
Mm.
sounds cool.
Yep. We get some wraiths splattered through here. Of just
Yeah.
somebody
Which are
died.
really the wraiths that are mentioned in this section, because again, like the toy box, there are these little sort of tinted sidebars that are specifically the chimerical or supernatural geography mixed in with the physical, and so you get these little local legends and stories and figures who are associated with individual places.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these are really good, some of these are really good story hooks. I'd rather have these than some of the NPCs that we get instead in the later chapters.
Yes. Or maybe they could take these stories and then make them NPCs in the later chapters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what I think about Kawa. Kawa? No,
Sorry,
Ka.
the Kaua. I sorry, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, the
the
guy. The
Kaua.
guy who really hates dolphins.
He hates dolphins because they scare away the sharks, which are his totem, and
Mm-hmm.
like the Nunihi, the Menehune need to. I guess he can't really enter his totem's material. He has to be in the presence of a shark to
Yep.
enter the Umbra.
Mm-hmm.
So he yells at the dolphins.
Yep. And he's been kicked out by the larger Menehune society.
I also like there are throughout this chapter there are little mentions of ecological issues, which is important in a general environmentalist sense, But in
Mm-hmm.
particular, when talking about Polynesian islands, this is something actually we also see in the Mage supplement Dead Magic 2, which touches on Polynesian culture. That many of the islands, my understanding is, historically had population issues in terms of having limited resources and kind of trying to control family size, things like that. And in more than one instance, if I'm remembering the history correctly, underwent ecological collapse. So Easter Island, Rapa Nui is the most famous example.
Mm-hmm.
But attending to those by continually highlighting the fragility of the ecosystem, it reminds me of that piece that it's not just about, oh, the environmentalist impulse to preserve and maintain species and everything. It's also this historically embedded consciousness of things like food web and food supply,
Yep.
you know?
Well, yeah, and that's also highlighting it's not like the modern Western environmentalist conception is also about just doing it for its own sake. I
Right,
mean,
right,
some
right.
people might think it that way, but that's we're all living here together, and
Yeah. But on Hawaii in particular, because it is
yeah.
so isolated and has been for so long, it's, I imagine, something that's much more maybe subtly enfolded into the culture, you know?
Mm-hmm. And you could definitely like when you have islands like that, making one island collapse is not hard.
Right. So then we get, after Lanai, we get Kaho'olawe, which is an uninhabited island used as a sacred site to pray to fishing gods, and also to set off for Tahiti. And then the Navy took charge of it and used it for ordnance tests, so
Mm-hmm.
the ground is now full of unused mines and bombs. Great. Great job, Navy. And then we
Yeah.
get Molokai.
Mm-hmm.
I think I actually knew about the former leper colony there before reading this book, because it's something that you learn about in Catholic school.
Okay. Yeah, there's a little mention of the also the it's one of the Menehune kiths, but they're talking about it here, and it's like I almost feel like I like their kith frailty better for Boggins than the Boggin kith frailty,
Hmm.
but that's just a little side thing
Yeah.
because it also fits those Western like the where the knocker myths come from too. I think.
Yeah, yeah. And then we get to Oahu, the most populated of the islands, where Honolulu is located,
Hmm.
and Waikiki, sort of ground zero of tourism, which is, of course, where the Sealy Governor's Freehold is located.
Well, yeah, the Sealy She governor, of course.
Yeah.
He's definitely got big. Not even like villain or antagonist, just what a dick.
Apathetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, yeah.
It's like I'd want either better or worse. I think it's like,
But overall, the island is presented as being like simultaneously the longtime population center, a tourist trap, and a surfing paradise.
hmm
I think maybe the saddest and most infuriating sentence in the book is the sacred altar of Lono was located in front of what is now the Sheraton Waikiki Hotel.
hmm
Like, if that doesn't say everything about the appropriation of the lands and the culture and the disruption of the traditions for the sake of tourism, I don't know what will.
hmm
It's one
yeah,
of those things where the theme is repeatedly highlighted here, but it is frustrating how not much commentary from the authors is made on it.
yeah,
And then there's a Changeling Hotel where there's a boggin who wants all his guests to feel the escapism of the islands. We have sites in Honolulu,
hmm
including the Hawaiian Chinatown, the university, the Punch Bowl Crater, and Pearl Harbor,
hmm
whose description is mercifully short.
yep.
I'm glad that it wasn't like a whole page on Pearl Harbor.
I think you could do a book or something about it for Changeling or some game, but it wouldn't have fit in this book.
And I mean, having having grown up in the US, I've heard enough about Pearl Harbor in my life probably.
hmm I've only really heard about the aerial battle, but
Yeah.
I never studied it in school, so
Yeah, it's just one of those things.
it's just so. If you have any time travel thing when you're in a flying ship, you'll be in Pearl Harbor at some point.
My favorite location in this section probably is actually the Kahokueloelo Heiau, which is the ancient temple for the kahunas to gaze at the stars and named after a comet, where you get an extra success on all uses of soothsay during spectacular celestial activity such as meteor showers.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And then we move on to Kauai.
yeah. And this is
So,
the one Menehune village on this island.
yeah.
which also, why? I feel like there should be more of them, but
I would assume there are.
there's other sections that makes it seem like there aren't, but
Yeah. Well, or at the very least, there are other locations where individuals live, if nothing else.
oh yeah, it'd be like how many actual full-on Kithane towns are there? Probably not a lot.
What makes it different is because they don't have freeholds, which we should get to
Yep,
later on. There's not the same, oh, you can find a place to hang out wherever you go. It's no, there's the
yep.
one place.
Yeah, they don't have freeholds. They have what would make the she make a little bit more sense, as a, or a little bit more useful.
Yeah. And we do have references in that sidebar about the village, which is called Moe Ohane, at the foot of Mount Waialeale, the rainiest mountain, or the rainiest location in the world. But we do have reference to how the Menehune occasionally bring a human to the village to participate in ceremonies, someone who is an indigenous Hawaiian, and
Hmm.
usually a musician or crafter, so that they can be enchanted and they find new inspiration to create art and provide glamour for the Menehune at their next show or after their next creation. So this seems like a pretty clear example of, musing dreamers getting glamour from
Yep.
humans. And again, as with the Nunahi, we have kind of conflicting mentions of how, oh, they're cut off from the dreaming, it can only get glamour from nature, but then something like this.
It gets better. In a different chapter, they get in more detail about the village, and they talk about how they have some local trods.
Yeah. How do those work when you can't access the dreaming? I suppose they could be umbral trods, but yeah. Anyway, we get a bunch of other locations mentioned here.
Hmm.
I do like the mountain range that was once a living giant, which sounds like a proto-glome.
Hmm.
And then Ni'ihau, the last of the islands, which is privately owned by a ranch. And there's hardly any electricity, no telephones, no guns. The residents are primarily indigenous Hawaiians who are ranch hands. It's really, I feel gross reading about it. I don't I don't know what life is like there. If people are content there, cool.
Yeah. There's also apparently Menehune living there.
Yeah, but it just seems kind of like weird to me that this is like a privately owned ranch that is also an island, and the people that live there, living their traditional ways
Hmm.
of life, are ranch hands. There's something that
Yeah.
makes me feel uncomfortable. So,
Yeah, I don't blame you. I just looked it up. It's 2010 census population is 170.
okay.
It's still owned by the Robinson family.
I guess it's better than being owned by Big Pineapple
Hmm.
or Big Fruit.
But yeah, they're not. It's like English is not the dominant language on that island. It's
Yeah.
Hawaiian.
And the chapter closes with what I think of as actually a very lovely section on the flora and fauna. You get a lot of information about different species and even their status in terms of endangerment, as well as a chimerical pig that if you slay it and eat its flesh, you can make prophecies, which I think is
Hmm.
great.
This also made me think if you, for some reason, were running a game set in Hawaii, and someone's playing a puka,
Lots of options.
they could play some of these type of animals, right?
Why not?
Okay.
And that's it for the setting chapters for book one.
Yes.
So overall, I mean, as we said, it is actually shorter than the San Francisco setting chapters. I mean, it's only about 40 pages total, those three that we just went through. And yet I feel like there's more information in there, page for
Yeah.
page.
Like you could look it up on Wikipedia. I don't know if I could find it listed as handily
Yeah,
online.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it'd be one of those. I'd probably, if I was running a game there, I'd probably still start from this book and then look up more details as needed.
Yeah. Shall
So
we
yeah.
get into the characters then in chapter
Yes.
4?
The Sealy Court.
So I found the Sealy to overall be pretty boring. I'm gonna say.
I I had some active dislike of how it was written. Like,
Yeah, they just seemed
first of
very.
all, a bunch of Fiona Bland party people,
Yeah.
but like boring party people, and Nellie, like the way they wrote Nuella. I don't know. Is she from the novels, or is she just?
So actually, I think the only Seelie character who even makes an appearance in the novel is Kiraven, the Slua, at the
Yeah,
very end.
because I
Who,
found Nuala to be kind of offensive as a character.
yeah, it's not great. She is a former call girl slash, I don't know.
Yeah, and like even Count Menhiron, again, he's like just it's like okay, you can make a she like that, sure, but like he's all afraid of change. Like that's literally what the Fiona like their boon is that they're not afraid, and they're supposed to be wanting adventure, not anyway.
Yeah, he's just overall kind of lazy and likes living in the lap of luxury.
Any other Sealy house would work.
Yeah. I don't think we get any House Liam in this book.
Yeah, you could make him Liam. You could make him Gwydion. You could make him like
There are options.
yes. You could do all the. It's just I just found Fiona to be the worst option, and it's like, oh, they're just kind of boring satyrs. Therefore, we should.
Yeah.
Because he throws a lot of parties.
I do like that Nuella has a chimeric dagger with a tiny scorpion inside. That's
Oh
pretty
yeah,
cool.
we have Sammy, the
Monkey Pooka.
monkey puka. I like him. Maybe he's a bit too one-dimensional, but
Yeah.
and then I like George a lot. I have questions about George, like
Yeah, he seems to have the one ring on his ankle. So,
also, how did a seagull go through the chrysalis?
yeah,
Like,
it sounds like he was a seagull. He was born a seagull and then realized he was a changeling or something, which raises all kinds of questions.
well, no, he's a seagull. That's his last name, right? That's what it says.
Well, that's the joke he tells. So,
Yes.
but it says George actually did grow up among the seagull population of San Diego.
Yeah.
Okay, was that
Yeah.
after his chrysalis, or was he just a seagull?
Yeah. And you have Nahome and Chog, which I'm like, I guess.
I actually like the idea of Nahome as because I like the idea of a
Mm-hmm.
bartender character in general,
Yep. And, a former issue sitting down and being a bartender, that's pretty cool.
and her unfortunately named bouncer Chog.
Yeah. And then Karavan. Okay, so she's the one from the book. Yeah, she was sort of the most fleshed out character, so that makes sense.
Yeah, she has some rough stuff in her backstory. So
I'm also confused by her under image. She's got 3 different forms that she can look like, which I just no idea what they're talking about. It's like, okay, there's the mortal side, to other Kithane, and then under Glamour. I'm like, what?
I guess it could be that like when she calls on the weird. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, they didn't have that yet.
I guess the second form is more about what she's wearing and her
Yeah.
voile and fey mean, and then
Hmm.
the last bit is about her actual appearance.
Yeah. There's a few things like that in here. Actually, in a lot of these, especially one ebooks, where I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what? It just felt like, was this from a different game? Or, I don't know.
There's also lots of connections to San Diego. Like a lot of these characters
Yeah.
say, they originally hailed from San Diego. So
Well,
maybe,
so,
as you said, when it was somebody had spent some time in Hawaii who had written that geography section, maybe they were from San Diego and had flown out there for an extended trip, and
yeah.
that informed the writing of the
So,
book.
so yeah, George did not show up in any of the books, any of the novels.
No, none of them except Kiravan, as far as I
But
recall.
Karavan came. Okay, yeah,
And Kiravan was just like a flash in the pan. She like shows up in one scene, I
yeah.
think.
And then she travels here because she overheard the seagull talking.
Yeah.
Um, okay.
By contrast, the Unseelie are all in the novels. So,
Yeah.
well, not all of them. I
Yeah.
think the last two
Okay.
are not. But
So I had a bunch of questions I wrote down. Then now you tell me it was in the novel. Makes a lot more sense.
yeah. Well, so we get Italian, the forsworn prince of House Elul. Difficult to say. He is perhaps the first character we see with appearance 7, so he's just the
Hmm.
full-on pretty she. But he also has Glamour 10, which is a rare thing because he is freshly arrived from the dreaming. So he is
Hmm.
sort of the quintessential cold manipulator who believes in ruling over mortals and snacking on all their glamour whenever he feels like it, and wants to build a new Unseelie court in Hilo with people that support this idea.
Yeah. And then we had the Glynis write up where
Yeah.
I really didn't like her either in this description, and then later they talk about her, and I liked her better as a character at that point.
She is much more interesting in the books.
Yeah, well,
So,
this description right here, she's terrible. Later on, it's like, because she's seeming like completely loyal for no good reason to Tertullian. And I'm like, why?
She so in the toy box, she actually shows up in the toy box as well. She's the one that sends the enchanted harp to Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler, And she's kind of set up as a power behind the throne type. She has her own
Mm-hmm.
machinations that she wants to put together.
They also have a little chapter about her, like little paragraph here talking about how she avoids showing her fairy form to not make the prince there jealous. And I'm like, how does that work?
She only has appearance 6. Why would he care?
What is she like, hiding in her banality all the time around him or something?
No, no, no. She just, doesn't wear makeup or whatever.
Okay.
She's still very she-like. She just doesn't.
Okay, that's what showing her fairy form means, not some metaphysical thing.
She doesn't let it all hang out, as she often do, quite nearly so often.
Yeah, and then you have Lord Devlin.
Devlin the milksop.
Yeah, who was pretending to be Seelie and then got in trouble with High King David over it.
But is also a Fiona. So more on Seelie Fiona.
Yep. And then we have the ugly, hot Argo and Mahler twins.
Yeah, with appearance 4, but then described as ugly trolls.
Oh, they're also described as hot earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we get into Lady Siva and then Gamine LaRouche. I'm like, someone, and I can't even guess about the gender of the person or the writer or whatever, but somebody was a bit too horny writing this section, I think. But
Yeah.
it's just
Yep.
like talking about the other thing. It's like, okay, this is kind of going.
Pair of satyr ladies in a kinky relationship. Yep.
Yep. And it's like really emphasizing it and getting into lots of physical details.
I think it's supposed to be Lady Shiva as well, which makes it kind of almost worse.
Yeah. Like you were talking before with the like not wanting to mention genitals. I'm like, well, I don't think that's the same author as this part.
Well, they don't mention
Genitals,
I don't
no.
think they mention genitals. It's just, yes, it's very...
They mention everything else in detail.
Yeah.
And then Bonaparte Gonzalez. Was he in the book?
So Lady Shiva, I think, shows up briefly. Gamine LaRouche, her lover, I don't recall at all from the books. And Bon Gonzalez is definitely not in the books.
Yeah. Because I don't really get what he's... It's another, like, why was this NPC dropped in here?
I assume to kind of add contrast, because with the setup that you have here, it's kind of like the Ancili of Hilo. If you're playing with the Immortalized story, you have Ertalion and Glennis as kind of the main central figures.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not doing that, you have Devlin and Shiva and Gamine, and I guess Argo and Mahler, the troll twins. And then Bon Gonzalez is like a third option of the commoner Unseelie who wants to kind of truly...
But why don't they just make him a redcap who grew up in Hawaii?
Because everyone needs to have a connection to Southern California, I guess.
Okay.
Los Angeles this time instead of San Diego, but still.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's an idea that Hawaii doesn't have the same kind of urban things that are part of the tropes of cities in the US, because it is rather small and removed. Maybe the authors expected that the readers wouldn't buy like an actual homegrown gang leader.
Wait, do we get any Kithane born in Hawaii?
I don't think so.
Yeah, because there's definitely people in Hawaii that aren't like that could be Kithane.
Yeah, no, there are.
In fact, they talk about all these Kithane who grew up in Hawaii. They just don't mention their names or give them.
No, among the NPCs. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the Unseelie Court of Hilo, or the Unseelie Society of Hilo. And then we get the Galleon and Prodigal, beginning with the Menehune.
Yes.
Who, again, are characters in the books. So.
Yes. And start with just saying mana is their word for glamour.
Which I like the way that mana in Changeling terms is sort of explored here, because it's simultaneously glamour, but then also sort of the symbolic spirituality of the land and the people and the connection between them. And I like that. I like that representation. It's very different from Mage, for example, where, it's essentially the same as Quintessence with varying levels of cultural sensitivity worked into it. But and certainly a lot deeper than Magic the Gathering, for example.
Mm-hmm. And then they have stats for how your ability would like little star system.
Yeah. So you have etiquette 4 for the chief when he's operating in his own culture's environment, but then presumably it would be 0 outside of that.
Yeah. Which for the NPC stat blocks, I mean, that's a thing I've had come up in role-playing games occasionally where you're just like, well, this is very specific cultural
Yeah.
ability or skill or whatever. And
Or situational.
yeah, because yeah, like etiquette is definitely one where that's always cultural, right? Like you can't. There's no universal etiquette.
I think there's a few standards that we can agree on.
Yeah,
General standards. But yeah, no,
but
it's true. And I do wonder, you have things like specialties or the rule from mage where it's
mhm.
you can have a specialty even at levels lower than 4.
Okay, law even more so.
What's
That
that?
one definitely law would be a better example even than etiquette then,
Yeah, so traditional law versus academic or not academic.
or law for which culture, right? Like
Right.
even a lawyer from France in England might have trouble, you know.
Again, I think there are certain
Yeah,
traditions of law that share things in common, but
yeah.
anyway, it's an interesting idea. I don't know that this is the best way to
And
make it
it
work.
didn't say they're not allowed to drive car.
Oh no, it does. It does say that.
Oh, they say they can't drive cars. Oh shoot, I
In
missed
the
that.
character creation section, it is
Okay.
in there. So
Never mind. Okay, I was hoping this was a bit better.
no.
Yeah. So then you start with Chief Makani,
Mm.
who's another boring as High King David.
He has a very small role in the novel. So
Yeah, he's a leader who's well respected and has some family problems.
he's a bit like the chief that we get in Freehold and Hidden Glens, where he's sort of just
Yes.
this generic chief figure
Mm-hmm.
and not very three dimensional. There is the note about him losing his wife and how that affected him, which gives him a little bit of depth. But
Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, it's like High King David level character depth.
yeah. Then we have his daughters, Kanani and Lulani. Kanani is the elder, diplomatic, and dutiful one
Mm-hmm.
who's the heir, and Lulani is the more extroverted and sorcerous one who's kind of like an ambassador.
Mm-hmm. And I kind of like them. Their
Yeah,
description.
I like Lulani a lot in the novels. She's
Yeah.
cool. And then Hamaya, who's the chief lore master. And
Mm-hmm.
holy cats, his arts and realms. You're just like, oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh, look, Primal 5, Soothsay 5, Sovereign 5, Wayfair 5, Actor 5, Fae 5.
yeah. And this was in first edition. They didn't have nearly as
Yeah,
many. So that's a higher percentage of the total everything.
yeah.
Wait, they all have
He's
sovereign.
well, they're all
Yeah.
nobles. So
Yes. Oh yeah, the noble kith.
we do get two commoners. So we have
Mm-hmm.
Kenu and Poki, who are a warrior and crafter respectively. They are not in the novels, as far as I remember.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have some depth to them, and I feel like they could be interesting characters to include on with story hooks of their own.
So what do you? I'm trying to figure out. There's a section for Kenu. It talks about him slipping into the dreaming.
Mhm.
What do you think that was meant by that? Was that just like a dream, the dreaming, or what?
Presumably.
Okay.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I had a bit of trouble following some of this just because I hadn't. Maybe I should have. If I was using this again, I'd definitely be going back and forth because there's so much. I was just reading it sort of in order, and there's so much terminology that's later in the book, but that's just sort of the structure. So maybe if you are going through this and you are using it, maybe go to the Minahune chapter first, and then
Yeah,
come back to these characters.
yeah, probably sensible.
Oh yeah, Pokey's description also. Yeah, Pokey had the opening of the Trods.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we got the Selkies.
Yes, who, despite having their kith right up in the toy box, don't appear in the first novel, only in the second, and this is where they're all listed as NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, as I've said before, have a deep affection for the Selkies.
Yeah, it seemed like they were making this book so you didn't 100% have to have Toy Box to use it. 'Cause they kept
Yeah,
referring to stuff.
yeah. I mean, you have like information about how Selkie skins work and such.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Undine, who's the leader of the Selkies of Rocky Shore, which is just north of San Francisco. And I like her as the generic leader character because, again, in the novels, she's also like an expert storyteller, a healer, and someone who goes up and down the coast rescuing her kin,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a cool assortment of qualities for someone to have. We have her lover, Thessalon, and Drifter, who's a 9-year-old kid who wants to be a surfer and hangs out with them. There's Muet, the Selkie who fled an abusive marriage to come be the babysitter, and her brother Morse, who wants to be a computer programmer, or is a computer programmer, I suppose. And then Simon, who's kind of like this wandering former alcoholic southern country music singing guy.
Okay, so Simon's not Muette's ex.
No, 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 no.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I
I think
missed that
Simon
part.
likes her, but
Yeah. And some Dantain. These were in the book, I assume?
yes. So we had Ryder in the toy box, and he's kind of the central former She Knight. So I guess we do have a Liam Sheen here because he is former Liam.
Mm-hmm.
So he's the evil Dantain haunting the characters, and then we have three of his associates who all show up in the novel:
Mm-hmm.
a former Ishu, a former troll, and a mortal, which I'm confused by.
Me too.
The fact that he's called a Dantain.
Also, how they got him involved by this Banality Nine guy that you enchant, and then he remembered any of it?
Well, so again, in the books, I keep saying
Yeah.
in the books as a preface to this. So he's unable to see Fae anything. He got enchanted once by Ryder, and that was how Ryder convinced him, like, I'm possessed, you have to help me. And he's like, it's okay. I'll help you purge yourself of this sin and also hunt down and kill people who also have this
Oh,
sin.
maybe his banality was low then?
Perhaps. Or Ryder just did a really good job enchanting. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe there's some Dantean Doom. That would be an interesting Dantean Doom. You strip away the mists of someone you enchant.
Yeah. But it's just weird calling him a Dantain because he also does get enchanted, I think, a couple times in the novel when he's like, all right, I guess show me your horrible demonic magic again so I know what we're up against, kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it is weird to include him as a Dantain, even though he's mortal. Like, there's nothing Fey
Mm-hmm.
about him.
And he got Law 5.
It also, he is also from Puerto Rico, and we get a description that is less than flattering of that island,
Mm.
which I'm not wild about. Overall, they're a good, I suppose they're an okay pack of antagonists
Mm-hmm. So we have only one vampire.
that we know about.
Yeah, well, there's only one vampire described here,
Yes.
who's a gangrel indigenous Hawaiian.
And then we have a Black Fury werewolf for some reason.
Yep.
They are fighting Big Pineapple.
Yes. I want to bring up, we also have some mages. And going with some themes I've been noticing in other Changeling books. So we have Swan Chang, he's an Akashic. He has an Arete of 5, and his highest sphere is 3. And we have Geraldine Kravitz, who's a dream speaker with an Arete of 8,
Yeah.
Spirit 5.
I'm actually really annoyed by her as a character because as much as I like mages having grounding in the real world and being, if not street level, at least keeping in touch with their humanity to a degree, I do think it's a little ridiculous that an Arete 8 mage needs to, quote, supplement her income by telling the fortunes of the few special clients who can put up with her abrasive manners. It's like,
Yeah,
why
like
is
let's go
this?
through. Okay, she doesn't have matter, so she can't literally create gold, but still, like,
Still, she has life. She doesn't need to eat, probably.
also, she's essentially an oracle who's what, got a bookstore or something? No, a bar.
No, no,
No.
she visits Nahome's bar. She
Oh,
just lives in a bungalow and I guess tells fortunes to people. So it just seems a little bit strange for that to be
also,
like one of the most powerful mages in the world. So
she's also got no time or entropy. Like, of the things she could do to make income with magic, fortune telling is actually something she's pretty bad at.
yeah. Well, maybe she just does unawakened regular old
Oh, maybe
tarot
she's well.
reading.
She'd be really okay. She does have mind 3 and Arete 8, so she'd be very good at cold reading.
Yes.
Plus, she could talk to spirits and command them and create an umbral realm. Um,
All useful things, as well as shapeshift.
yep.
And then we get a pair of wraiths that hang out together, neither of whom I'm particularly interested in.
Yeah, I kind of skimmed them too. It's like, is that just a little girl wraith? I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Her protector, who used to be a soldier. Okay.
And then a general who is 1 month, only months away from retirement, who died in Pearl Harbor.
Okay. Sure. So it's a lot of characters. And some of them are quite engaging. Some of them could be useful in
Mm-hmm.
Chronicle, and others just no idea.
Yep.
And then we get to chapter 7, scenes.
Yes. So there's 3 stories here: Echoes of Legend, Welcome to the Jungle, and Reflections on the Mirror.
Yes.
Um,
Similar to the toy box setup.
I kind of liked. Actually, I actually liked Echoes of Legend. It's a.
Treasure hunt.
I mean, it's a treasure hunt. It's very open ended. It has a lot of advice for what to do if your player characters do something like you didn't expect or didn't the author didn't expect. It's got a lot of detail actually,
Yeah, we have a whole.
and has that nymph.
Yes, the nymph is what I'm most excited about. But, well, so before
Yeah.
getting to the nymph, we have an entire tale that you can essentially recite that's several paragraphs long about the legendary chief Kaiao and the nymph Kaliandrana, who fell in love and had wedding rings made by Pele given to them. And then
Mm-hmm.
Pele got angry, they had to run, they lost the rings, and for whatever reason, the players decide they're going to recover them.
Mm-hmm.
But meeting the nymph, yeah, so I feel like we could put together at this point all of the data about nymphs as a kith.
Yeah.
So
New
they're,
Storyteller Vault supplement.
I mean, potentially. So he's given a court. So Kukui is the nymph, and
Yeah.
he's kind of like a super inanimate because he can take various forms. He can become translucent in the
Yeah.
water and be very fluid. He'll be bark-like with green hair if
Yeah.
he emerges from his tree. So it seems like
He's also kind of like Gilly Doo vibes a little bit
a little bit, but again, not
because he's very
not
tied
really.
to an area. Not. I guess you could say that's kind of like your.
That's like an anime too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I would say that's more like an anime than Giladu.
I keep on thinking of the different anime that actually can take their anchors with them, but not all of them
Mm.
can.
He also has these special abilities within his grotto of merging with natural elements, healing minor wounds,
Mm-hmm.
command the area to do things like having water swirl around or tree branches to wrestle, etc. So he has this sort of generic control of the land and the elements.
Mm-hmm. And it's also where he came from. It's unclear. He was small. He doesn't really remember. He sought refuge in the grotto, and then it seemed familiar, and then things just sort of happened. But like he doesn't seem to actually be a changeling.
No, I don't think he is, which makes it interesting that he's given a court and legacies and a seeming and all of the other things for a changeling to have. So,
Yeah.
but he does have banality too, so there must be some sort of.
I mean, maybe this is still where the she or the other kind of changeling. Maybe he's something like that.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think we have enough information to know for sure.
Yep.
In any case, long story short, he helps them find the rings. So,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to fight a dragon for some reason.
Also, there's an autumn person geologist shows up.
Yeah, as we mentioned before, it's, just kind of frustrating. And like we're really not given any information on her besides, by the way, she's an autumn person.
And a geologist. That's the two. These two important. It's like other
Well, yeah.
books hate psychologists. This one hates geologists.
Which, again, fine, but give me some kind of counterexample.
Or at least,
or depth, anything.
yeah, it's like, what did she do besides just geology?
She's just so aggressive about geology.
Yeah. I feel like actually this book was, I know it's written by 3 people, but it gives me this vibes like if you had somebody who went to go do their like some sort of geology based PhD and then had a terrible professor and dropped out and then wrote a Changeling book. That's how it
Could happen.
And there's Kotlil the dragon,
Cordial.
who's described as that bears a semblance of a traditional Oriental dragon. I'm like, what? I don't know enough about Hawaiian folklore. Is that part of Hawaiian folklore?
No, but I mean, there are long-standing Chinese and Japanese populations there, so perhaps that's the reason behind.
Yeah. And then you, at the end, you do things, and then everyone has very heteronormative dancing.
Of course.
Because this book suggests you're het unless you're unseelie.
Well, it was the 90s.
Yeah, but still. Anyway. Given the themes of Changeling and some of the authors, not necessarily of this book, but
I'm willing to go along with the notion that perhaps the traditional dances tend to be heteronormatively sorted. Sure. So
yeah, it's more the unseelie stuff that then makes you go.
The dangerous lesbians of the unseelie court.
Yep. the dangerous kinky lesbians even. Yeah.
Those sensual Fiona.
And it's like, okay, the Unseelie here are the ones that enchant people. I think that was it.
Yeah, but just to hook up with them and get glamour.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of in these both these two. Yeah, actually, no, it's the second story. We'll talk about that. It starts out with this one. I didn't. It's a very linear story. That's like, oh, a chimerical fish is attacking, and everybody sees it, and you go chase the fish.
But it's a trap. The fish has friends.
Yes. I'm like, why are you chasing the fish? They have a gremlin that there was some interesting chimera here. The fish
Yeah.
and the pug, which is a weird biped. It's like
I kept picturing Ditto the Pokemon.
oh, I was picturing Gumby.
Oh, that works too.
Yep. And then there's gremlins, which are nothing like the later Thowling, but they're more like xenomorphs.
Yeah. Cannibals too. Or not cannibals,
Yeah.
consumer. Yeah.
Yep.
Xenomorphs that will eat Cathane.
Mm-hmm. And then I kind of skimmed at this point.
I do like the line about the gremlin. For example, if Gremlin consumes Mary, a childling issue, he will have the choice of healing 3 wounds or adding 3 health levels to his total pool. So,
Why did Mary?
what did Mary do?
Why Mary? Why did he need to name the example there?
Anyway,
it was childling issue named Mary, the relevant one.
So then we get evidence of the Unseelie court essentially going around ravaging dreamer artisans. And they meet Michael Cole the troll, again from California.
Yep. There's multiple times they tell you what dice to roll, and if all the player characters fail to roll, then I guess the game's over. The way it's supposed to, or it doesn't really say what to do about it if they fail, only if they succeed, which is move the plot forward.
I guess just have them keep rolling.
Yep. And then just talk about like like ravaging as this super obvious like complete tainting of the person and destroying them.
Well, there's I don't know about destroying them, but certainly it talks about how the artisan who gets ravaged will have several days or however long a period of time when they can't create.
Yeah.
They're not being rhapsodized. They're just
okay. It's okay.
Still not sustainable, probably,
with
all these Unseelie running around.
Yeah, you're supposed to target the tourists,
right?
Yeah. So you get Michael Cole, the Grump Troll, who's grumpy,
and Wyvern, the Redcap.
The Sealy Redcap.
Yes. Well, there have to be a couple. But overall, I think the linearity of the story doesn't bother me as much as the relative insignificance. Because essentially, the point of the story is find out that there's these new Unseelie in town shaking things up, which is Ertalion and Glynis and their entourage. And then the ending of the story, the sort of springboard into something in the future is, do they have enough information to tell Queen Aeron? Are they going to inform Duke Aeon? How will the Count's court react? What should the characters do? And I just feel like, unless you're running a game which is very heavily predicated on courtly intrigue being the centerpiece of all of the plots, this is the kind of thing that you could do in like a scene or two and just wrap up.
Yeah. It's just the scene or two introduction to the third story.
Yeah.
Is what it is.
Except it's a lot more than a scene or two.
Yeah, this could take sessions.
Yeah. Because you get chased by fish first.
I mean, you could just do the chased by fish and then turn that in. That you could be done at that point.
Right. They chase you all the way to the new Unseelie Freehold, and then your job's done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we get the third one, Reflections on the Mirror, which is all about the deceitful and underhanded ways of the Shadow Court, which you have just uncovered.
So here, Shadow Court appears to just be an Unseelie? Or no, I guess he is a Leal, so...
Yeah. Well, he sets his court as the Court of Shadows. So not the Shadow Court, just a shadowy court, I suppose.
So it starts out, it's like the introduction scene is, there's a 24/7 party with lots of booze and lots of horny people.
Carnal activities.
Yeah, but then it's like, okay, what's so bad about... And it's enchanted mortals serve the kid Thane in any manner they desire. I'm like, okay. Doesn't present it like that part's really a problem? Maybe? I don't know.
There's a whole scene in the novels in this sort of...
Yeah.
In the court. I think it's the sort of hedonistic free-for-all that you'd expect from no holds barred,
Yeah,
sexy, unseelie with high
but they
appearance.
just presented earlier that like the enchanted mortals have no choice really in engaging in this. So not just they're enchanted mortals who want to party.
I'm not saying that Ertalian is actually a stand-up guy. He's
Mm-hmm.
cold and ruthless and doesn't care for humans. So
Yeah,
yeah, he's an awful person.
yeah, but it's dropping that in for the player characters, and there's no anyway. You're gonna want to put some thought into this if you are following this in your game now.
Oh, of course. I assume
Yeah.
because the option is there for the characters to be unseelie themselves, having recently arrived, and
Mm-hmm.
having that in there presents like the choice of this is something that
Mm-hmm.
isn't cool. So having
Yeah.
them question their own loyalty to the cause, I guess, on the basis of, hey, this Forsworn Prince is
Mm-hmm.
doing some gross stuff.
Yep. I don't know. I just wish they said it was gross or something. But anyway, yeah, we get into the plot of the story where there you meet Callie. I assume she was in the book too.
I think she briefly appears. I remember he has like a mortal that he
Mm-hmm.
dallies with.
Yeah, and the whole plot is you meet her a bunch.
Well, and then you have to steal a book.
Yeah, because this is where you learn that like she's actually working for Glynis, kind of.
Yeah.
And yeah, Glynis is not actually. This is where the part, as opposed to the write up of Glynis, where she's not actually just doing whatever the prince wants and trying to make him happy. She's doing some things for her own, trying to get these immortal eyes.
Which we still don't have that much information about.
Mm-hmm. And then it's like a whole like treasure hunt, not treasure hunt, but like taking you through and finding a book that then gives you more info on it.
And more about how Italian likes to torture people.
Yep. Yeah, The Immortal Eyes of Sandgrain. About investigation reveals a mythological book about some tiger eye gems that are reputed to have magical healing abilities tied in with immortality. And then you have the choice on, do you go to Prince Italian or do you give the book to Glissane, in which case Prince Italian will find out quick?
Yeah.
Because I guess she's actually working for Prince Italian. Or maybe she didn't really know what was going on. I'm also disturbed by that hot tub picture. The more I look at it, I'm not sure what I'm seeing, and I don't know if I want to know.
We do actually get some information about the eye stones. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize until flipping to this page just now, but the journal pages, I guess, hidden in the book that you steal.
Mm-hmm.
So we do finally get some definitions of the eye stones and what they can do, but they still remain nebulous.
So this is a mortal. This is all written by a mortal, right? Oh no, dear me, no, it's not written by a
No,
mortal.
no,
Sorry.
it's meant to be Italian, I believe,
Yeah.
because it's like his journal pages hidden in the book,
Mm-hmm.
I think, which is, I believe, also a plot thread in the novels, but I'd have to reread them. He has also made contact with the Dantean and is kind of using Ryder, because Ryder has one of the eye stones embedded in his palm, and he's sort of using him to, I believe, locate the others, one
Yep.
of which the Oathmates have. And that's it. That's the third story before we get to
Mm-hmm.
the appendix about the Menehune.
Yes, and this started off with. I didn't like this page, the first page of the Menehune. It said some things that I didn't like. They're related to the Nunehi, and which are a large group of Fae closely tied to indigenous cultures of hunter-gatherer humans.
Yeah,
There's a lot I don't like about that sentence.
There's a lot of poorly chosen words there. Yes.
They've refused to change with the rest of the world, bravely resisting modernity and its banality. And I'm like, okay, are you saying like basically they're kind of Nunehi, which would include anywhere that's quote unquote hunter gatherer cultures?
Which they are not really. So it's
Yeah,
like, yeah.
well, that too, if near the Nune. At least not anyway.
If your definition of hunter gatherer is these people don't have suburbs, then yes, technically you're correct, but your definition needs some work.
Yes. And yeah, the Menehune are found in Easter Island, Tahiti, and especially on Hawaii. They have close cousins on New Zealand and New Guinea.
The Easter Island part is perplexing to me because it was definitely abandoned at some point. So I don't know why
Yeah.
Menehune would have lingered there.
Well, maybe they didn't need the changeling way because there's no people there for a while. I don't know.
I don't know.
New Guinea would be a whole other with the culture of there because it would not just be Menehune as the indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
But
Well, it does say close cousins, So
Yes, no, but I mean, if New Guinea would be interesting, just because there's so many different groups you would call
oh yes,
indigenous
yeah.
there.
And then we have this bit again about being cut off from the dreaming and not gaining glamour from it, and must instead gain glamour from nature in the spirit world, which is directly undercut by other parts of this very same book. So
Yes.
yeah, I kind of ignore this opening and just go straight to the character creation.
Yeah. I thought we should mention it though for the
Yeah.
podcast. Yeah. So these ones, unlike what we got earlier from the Nunahi, they only have two camps: the feast and the war, which are just Seelie and Unseelie, basically. But it also describes how they gain glamour.
We have some legacies and the seemings, and an interesting note that instead of being divided into kith, the Menehune follow social divisions. So we have the Ali'i and the Kahuna are the nobles, and the Hana and Kokua are commoners.
Mm-hmm.
I like the notion of the Ali'i. Essentially, the way they work is because the Menehune don't have balefires, the Ali'i can hold lots and lots of extra temporary glamour, up to quadruple their normal glamour rating.
Mm-hmm.
So they're invested with it during the annual Manahiki feast. What I'm wondering is, so essentially all of the Menehune present spend temporary glamour that get invested into the chief, and then they can use that glamour as their own for things like cantrips if they're within 50 feet of him. The problem is that if it's only done during the annual feast, that means they have only that pool. Not only that pool, they can still get glamour from nature, whatever, but that pool that the chief holds is only available for
Yeah,
it
it's
has to be
like,
it has to be it has to last for a whole year, and that's a long time.
well, it's not just the chief, is it? It's all the Alahi, because there's other ones. Like, there's multiple ones of them, at least in the village.
I suppose that's true, but it's still,
Yeah.
that's a long time to make not that much glamour last.
Yep. And they also get two frailties for some reason.
Right, yeah.
The she frailty, which is, I mean, pretty bad. Also, they're changelings. Why do they have the she frailty?
Yeah.
And then sacrosanct, which, okay. So, like, if I was tweaking this, I'd just get rid of the banalities curse for them.
Makes sense. But I do like
Yeah.
the notion that violating various
Oh, yeah.
kapu related to them will kind of corrupt the glamour they hold.
Yep.
And then the
Yeah.
kahunas are the lore keepers and spirit talkers and sorcerers, I suppose.
Yeah. I think these are my favorite out of the.
Yeah. Some of the birth rates and frailties are kind of ill-defined here.
Yeah.
So it just says they can speak with spirits. And sometimes that distracts them and they try to get omens. It's like getting
Mm-hmm.
omens doesn't seem like a frailty to me, but okay.
Yeah. Well, besides the elite having she birthright on beauty, like, does it make sense to you that they all just look like people chimerically? I don't know the. I said you said you read a little bit more about it. I'm like,
Well, so the Menehune in the traditional mythology, if I am getting it correct, are supposed to kind of be, I think, short and ruddy skinned and kind of like furry haired.
yeah.
So I suppose their options were to either go that route or kind of have them more reflect the indigenous people, which I think is the
Hmm.
better choice.
Yeah, you don't want them all the same appearance for one thing.
They appear as indigenous Hawaiians, except the
Yeah.
Ali'i are prettier, and I guess the Hana are
Yeah.
more simply dressed,
Hmm.
portly and short. It says the Kokua
Yeah.
are physically fit, or perfect physical
But like
specimens.
if you, but it's like there's no difference if you're enchanted or not seeing them. Is really what I'm.
Well, I guess they just get that added veneer of bling,
Yep.
glamorous bling.
Yeah. I don't know. I like my fairies to. I don't know. It depends on the culture. Like if the culture had them all look like people, sure, but you get all sorts of weird looking Kithane and other Kiths from other places. But
Yeah. Well, I don't mind it.
yeah, we have the Hana, which for some reason only get one birthright.
As do the Kokua, the warriors. The
Yeah,
Hana are the crafters, the Kokua are the warriors. One birthright and one frailty each.
yeah. I do, like I said, I do like the Hana frailty for. I'm like, I think that makes more sense for Boggins to me. But well, no, this is actually different. What it said in the other place. If for some reason the Hana cannot finish his task in the time he declares at the start of the task, you leave it uncompleted and never return to it. Any other Hana who attempt to finish it risk suffering banality. Okay, that's less cool than the other one saying if they're viewed, spied upon, then they have to abandon it. But I guess they would have to abandon it because of their craftwork ability.
I think that was specifically when they were doing something for Immortal as well.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, and the Kokua, they get +1 dexterity.
And that's it.
And they're cruel and excessive.
But not all of them are in the war camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they're great at surfing, apparently. So.
Yep. And then we get totems.
Or Aumakua.
Which read a lot like this. Just, I don't think there's any differences between this and when we talked about the Nunehi, besides.
The only difference is that it's pointed out they tend to have more frequently like plants and minerals and natural phenomena as totems, not just animals. Which the Nunehi too, I believe, often have plants as totems.
Yeah.
So just in contrast with Garou, we get some bunks. We get the note that they do not usually possess modern abilities such as streetwise drive, computer, and science.
At least it says do not usually, as opposed to cannot take. If they're all living in that, if it's just talking about the ones living in that village, sure. But
yeah. And notes about how they gain glamour from nature. Which
yeah, I found this kind of neat.
Yeah.
But if they're going to have, because it depends on their court or camp, their camp. If you're feast, you gather it from natural phenomenon, and war, gather it from hunting animals.
Generally.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can also get it from pure water, and then there's the harvesting versus raiding distinction, which is just basically reverie versus ravaging.
Ravaging, yeah.
But it's the same method of gathering glamour. And then blessing, where they can actually do they can't self-inspire. This is where they have to get it from their totem.
Yeah. It's totem inspiration.
Only 4 times a year. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, like Rapture, they can gain permanent glamour from it, so it's a potent form of...
And then the totems with separate rules for Garou for each totem. All 8 Garou in Hawaii. Maybe the Rokia can take it too. I don't know.
And then the chronology, which, again, is very detailed.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Apart from some curious ads at the back.
Don't break the spine, Pooka.
Don't break the spine. I have never broken the spine.
Mm-hmm. I've never assembled the spine, unfortunately. I don't think anyone has.
And then at the very back, so I have this little trading card that was inserted into the book that I've kept in there since I got it. And it is an advertisement for Arcadia the Wild Hunt.
Nice.
So, to assure that your retailer has Arcadia the Wild Hunt, fill out this card and have him pre-order yours today. The hunt begins July 1996.
You should go ensure that, Pooka.
Yep, I'll put it in the show notes. I wonder if it's still valid. I wonder if I could still send this in and say, excuse me.
No, I think you should keep the card. I don't think you can mail that off to Sweden now and expect them to have it on stock.
No. It's for your retailer. You give your name and your phone number to your local retailer and tell them, I would like you to order Arcadia the Wild Hunt, please.
Mm-hmm.
Just get in your time machine and...
Yep.
Anyway.
Oh, there's also an ad that card must have been right next to the ad for Vampire the Dark Ages.
I have it between the ad for the novel and the Don't Break the Spine ad. And I think that's where it was. But
okay.
Anyway.
So yeah.
And that's the book.
So using this in your game, what are your thoughts?
I would use it for a setting, definitely. If I were setting something in Hawaii, I would use this as inspiration for the different locations that characters might go, etc. When it comes to the Minihune, it has inspired me to do more research into this on my own. Recently at a bookstore, I found this volume of traditions and practices and cultural elements that were collected in the 70s, I believe, by researchers from the University of Hawaii at Manoa working with indigenous community groups. And it is a very thorough, deep exploration of a lot of things like the kapu system. So it's like Wikipedia in the sense that you get this initial jumping off point, but then you should take it upon yourself to go do your own research in a sensitive and responsible manner. And yeah, there's a lot of lush description you can use here, but take any of the assertions about the mythology or even the history to an extent with a grain of salt.
Mm-hmm. How about the mechanics and things like that? Or
mechanics, I think overall are fine. The NPCs really are ones that some of them I certainly wouldn't use. Others I definitely would. I think some of the NPCs are really well fleshed out.
With talking with various people, we ever come up with a better, I ever see a better way of doing Nunehi, I would definitely take that into account if I was doing Menehune, I think. But
Yeah. Ultimately, I think one of the ways to look at them is to say, from a Kithane perspective, from the point of
yeah,
view of, a white Concordian changeling who doesn't know any better, the Nunahi and the Minihune have a lot of similarities and therefore are just vaguely
yeah.
the same kind of Gallian. But then from their own perspective, obviously they're very different.
Although it actually says in this book explicitly that they'd be using Fey 1 and Fey 2, or maybe just Fey 1. But yes. But yeah, no, it's yeah. I found it very similar to combination of the toy box and us doing Rage Across Appalachia.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you think you could probably get by with, if you were interested in this and you didn't have the book and you weren't a completist or something like that, do you think you could get by with the C20 core book plus like Wikipedia and stuff?
Probably. You wouldn't get the NPCs that are handy to have, but overall.
Yeah.
Because C20 just takes this appendix and plops it in, essentially,
Yep.
to the Galleon chapter. So, anyway.
Doing your Menehune Rokea crossover, that could be
Could it? I don't know. All right. So that's our book dive.
Yeah, so yeah, once again, you can find us, our website at changelingthepodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook at Changeling the Podcast. You can find on Twitter at ChangelingCast. Follow our Discord. You can find that on our website or probably linked in the show notes. Definitely on our website.
By the time of this recording's release, we'll probably have a Patreon set up.
Yes, we are launching a Patreon. There will be more details. You can probably read about it easier than by the time we release the details, but we are working on setting up a Patreon.
Groovy.
Groovy.
All right, then.
Yeah.
With that.
Don't let any geologists make you fall into the mists.
Or into lava. Here come the outtakes.
Welcome to Mage the... Oh my god.
I'll tell you a linguistic tidbit. This is interesting. Hawaiian is a language that the K sound and the T sound, the ka and ta, are sort of in variation with each other. So things like Waikiki, you might have pronounced as YTT. Like the
and the P
director
and the
of that
B,
name.
I know those are in
Yes.
all
Yeah.
kinds of languages. So
Yeah. But KT is very uncommon.
mm-hmm.
So that variation. So they're both stops. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
linguistic side note. But yeah, so kapu and tabu are essentially the same. I mean, the actual systems differ from culture to culture, but the root concept, the word is cognate.